At 38,000 feet, the world outside the plane was a frozen panorama of clouds, silvered by the sun's late afternoon glare. Passengers reclined in their seats, drifting between movies and sleep, the occasional hum of conversation blending with the soft vibration of engines. Drinks rattled in their cups, small children fidgeted, and the occasional cough punctuated the steady rhythm of travel. Emily Carter leaned back in her aisle seat, eyes half closed, headphones resting over her ears. She had flown hundreds of hours as a certified flight instructor, but today she was just a passenger, returning home from a weekend seminar. Her body ached from a long week of work, but she was relaxed, letting the familiar comfort of flight lull her into a near daze. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the hum of the engines began to shift. A slight irregularity in the vibration beneath her fingers, a subtle shudder that made her stomach tighten. Emily's eyes snapped open. She tugged off her headphones and glanced out the window, searching for the faintest hint of trouble in the endless expanse of clouds. Nothing. The sun gleamed through the thin white veil like a deceptive spotlight, but instinct prickled along the back of her neck, cold and insistent. She sat up fully, scanning the cabin. The passengers were oblivious, yet the air had changed. There was a tension in the silence, a pregnant pause that carried weight beyond explanation. Then it happened. The hum of the engine ceased. Not gradually, not a sputter or a cough, a sharp, complete absence. Silence swallowed the cabin in an instant, like someone had turned off the heartbeat of the plane itself. Lights flickered as if uncertain whether to stay on. Emily's stomach lurched as she gripped the armrest. Drinks slid off trays, a soda can tumbled down the aisle with a metallic clatter. A mother screamed, clutching her baby to her chest. Across the aisle, a businessman froze mid-sip, eyes wide, jaw slack. Panic began its slow crawl through the cabin. A virus carried in sudden, collective realization. Emily's pulse roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. She didn't hesitate. Instinct, honed from years of rigorous flight training, surged forward. She bolted to the front of the plane, the intercom crackling with static. "Flight attendants," she shouted, her voice cutting through the mounting chaos. "What's happening in the cockpit?" A young attendant, barely older than Emily herself, shook, words tumbling out in a garbled mess. We don't know, both engines just went dead. We can't." Her voice broke as another tremor of panic ran down the aisle. Emily's heart hammered. Dual-engine failure was rare. Catastrophic, yes, but extraordinarily rare. She slid her badge from her pocket, flashing it to the attendant, her voice steady despite the adrenaline clawing at her insides. "FAA flight instructor. I can help. Open the cockpit door now." The attendant hesitated, eyes flicking toward the cockpit like it was a danger zone. Then, with trembling hands, she moved to unlock the reinforced door. It clicked, then swung open, revealing a scene Emily would never forget. Inside, the cockpit was chaos incarnate. Warning lights blinked in frantic red and amber flashes. The yoke quivered like it had a life of its own, and instruments flickered, some dead, some alive in a disjointed rhythm. The captain, Rodriguez, gripped the armrest with white-knuckled intensity, one arm injured, a streak of blood running down his forearm. Beside him, First Officer Hughes sat frozen, pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. Both men were trained professionals, but right now, terror was etched into their faces. "Emily," Hughes breathed, voice quivering, we can't control it." Emily's stomach dropped. Her mind raced through checklists, procedures, emergency protocols, all stored knowledge waiting to be summoned. She didn't flinch. "Step aside," she said calmly. The captain's mouth opened to protest, but she cut him off. "I know you're hurt, but you need to let me fly. Right now, seconds matter." Rodriguez's eyes flicked between her face and the dying instruments, then the horizon visible through the cockpit window, clouded but still a sliver of hope. His nod was almost imperceptible. Emily moved into the pilot's seat, her hands hovering over the yoke, feeling the weight of the aircraft in a way only someone trained could. She glanced at the altimeter, watching as the needle quivered. 38,000 feet. Too high to bail. too high to ignore gravity's relentless pull. Her eyes flicked to the emergency radio. She keyed the mic, voice steady, projecting authority she didn't entirely feel. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, we have dual-engine failure. Immediate assistance required. Altitude 38,000 feet. Position 40 miles northeast of the airport. Requesting guidance." Static. Nothing. Emily's jaw tightened. Radios were failing too. She reached for the backup systems, switching power to emergency battery. At least the altimeter worked, along with minimal navigation displays. She ran the calculations in her head: glide ratio, distance to the nearest airstrip, wind conditions, and most frighteningly, the trajectory toward the mountains ahead. The cabin trembled as turbulence picked up, though now it felt exaggerated, the plane losing speed, losing altitude. Emily's voice remained firm as she reassured herself, as much as the passengers could hear through the locked door. "We're going to get through this. Everyone, stay calm. Follow instructions." A child screamed in the distance, parents crying, others clutching prayer beads or crossing themselves. Emily's own hands ached as she gripped the controls. She could feel the aircraft's every shudder, every hesitation, every ounce of dying power. The engines weren't just failing, they were gone. And with them, the thin margin between controlled flight and catastrophe vanished. Rodriguez spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We're gliding into the mountains." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had expected bad scenarios in training simulations, but nothing had prepared her for the real weight of 178 lives depending on her decisions at this exact moment. The plane tilted slightly, and she felt the immense pull of gravity and momentum. She adjusted the yoke, fighting instinctual fear with calculated technique. She wouldn't panic. She couldn't. For the first time, the true scope of the situation hit her. Outside the window, clouds churned ominously, as if warning her of the trials ahead. Inside, passengers clung to anything solid. Every second stretched into eternity. And somewhere deep down, Emily realized, this wasn't about being a passenger or an instructor anymore. This was about being a lifeline. A flight attendant's voice trembled from the back. "She's taking over." Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hands were steady on the yoke, her mind calculating descent angles, glide distance, emergency landing options. Somewhere below, the mountains loomed, silent and jagged, ready to meet them if she failed. And then, almost too calmly, the plane shuddered again, violently this time, as if the aircraft itself were protesting. The overhead bins rattled, a bag tumbled to the aisle, passengers gasping. Emily gritted her teeth, feeling the full weight of responsibility in every fiber of her being. Somewhere behind her, she heard Rodriguez mutter, "Can she really do this?" Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't have time for fear. She didn't have time for doubt. She only had time for action. And as the plane continued its silent glide at 38,000 feet toward the uncertain horizon, Emily Carter realized that every instinct, every skill, every ounce of courage she had ever been trained to use would be tested, because there would be no second chances. The cockpit fell silent, save for the low, ominous creak of the airframe. The plane was dying, and she was its only hope. The cockpit smelled of smoke and fear. Emily Carter's hands hovered over the controls, steady but tense, as adrenaline hammered through her veins. The low hum of electronics flickered intermittently. Warning lights flashed like a chaotic Morse code. Rodriguez, the captain, leaned back, one arm pressed against his side where a deep gash oozed blood. His face, usually composed and authoritative, was pale and drawn. Hughes, the first officer, sat slumped, head shaking, eyes darting helplessly over the instruments. Neither man spoke, neither moved with purpose. Both were trained, experienced, but nothing had prepared them for total engine failure at cruising altitude. Emily's gaze swept the cockpit. She ran her eyes over the dead displays, scanning every dial, every readout. Airspeed was dropping rapidly. Altitude, 38,000 feet just moments ago, now descending faster than glide calculations allowed. Oxygen masks dangled from panels like slackened ropes, vibrating from turbulence. The plane, a massive airliner built to carry hundreds safely across continents, had become a coffin suspended in air. She swallowed, fighting the instinctive nausea, the vertigo, the fear. "We need a plan," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the cockpit's tense silence. "Hughes, check hydraulics. Rodriguez, scan emergency procedures. I'm taking control of the yoke." Hughes blinked, startled by her sudden decisiveness. I can't," he admitted, voice trembling. "I've tried, it's not responding. We're gliding, Emily, just gliding." Emily's chest tightened, but she forced calm. She had trained for engine failure, never this altitude, never with 2 engines gone, never with panic-stricken passengers depending on her. Still, instincts were honed through countless simulations, drills, hours spent correcting mistakes in other pilots. Now, theory would have to translate into reality. She moved into the captain's seat, the yoke cold beneath her palms, shaking slightly from the weight of her own trembling. She could hear the muted cries from the cabin behind her, the muffled panic, the rattling of overhead bins, the soft wails of infants. Emily drew a deep breath, grounding herself. "Radio," she said, turning to the control panel. "Mayday, dual engine failure. Altitude 37,500. Position 42 miles northeast of Springfield International. Requesting immediate assistance." Static hissed through the speaker, drowning her voice. She switched to backup emergency power. Nothing. The airwaves were silent. No control tower acknowledgement. No guidance. Just static, mocking in its indifference. Rodriguez grimaced. "We were too far from any airport, and the mountains," he swallowed. "We're headed straight toward the mountains." Emily's stomach sank. She had anticipated the worst-case scenario in drills, but facing it in 3 dimensions, with a plane full of civilians and 2 incapacitated pilots, was different entirely. She adjusted the yoke, trying to keep the nose level. Instruments flickered again. The artificial horizon was unstable, and the altimeter was now tumbling downward in rapid jerks. Turbulence shuddered through the fuselage like the plane itself was struggling to stay alive. Hughes coughed violently, gripping the side console. Emily glanced at him. He was in shock, or worse, slipping into hypoxia. She pressed the oxygen mask over his face, ensuring at least one of the trained pilots remained semi-conscious. "We can't do this together," she said quietly. "I have to fly. Both of you focus on the emergency systems. We'll get through this." The captain shook his head, voice tight with disbelief. "You're a flight instructor. You've never flown this aircraft alone at this altitude." "I've flown enough to get us out," Emily said firmly. Her hands gripped the yoke, muscles straining against the loss of hydraulics. The controls were heavy, sluggish, resisting every input. She felt the plane's wings tilt subtly, forcing her to correct with small, precise motions. Each adjustment had to be perfect or catastrophic. A shudder ran through the fuselage. A panel alarm flashed crimson, indicating a fuel leak. Emily's mind raced. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Engine failure confirmed. Rapid descent continuing. Passengers behind her were trapped, terrified, reliant on the one person who refused to succumb to panic. "We're going to have to glide it," Emily said. "There's no engine power, no radio contact. We have one chance. I need a clear path toward water or flat terrain, not mountains." Rodriguez exhaled slowly, almost a whisper. "There's a lake about 10 miles northwest. Maybe if you can reach it, you could." Emily nodded grimly, already calculating descent angle, wind direction, altitude loss per mile. Every second mattered. Every miscalculation could cost lives. She adjusted the yoke and throttles, the powerless throttles, and tried to guide the plane toward the lake shimmering in the distance, barely visible through the scattered clouds. The cockpit filled with tension so thick it could be sliced with a knife. Every breath from Hughes and Rodriguez was audible. Every creak and groan of the airframe sounded like a threat. Emily ignored the panic clawing at her chest. She forced herself to focus on the physics of flight, the glide slope, the wind, the diminishing lift. "Passengers," she said softly but firmly, as if speaking through the cockpit's glass would somehow reassure them. "You will survive, trust me. Brace yourselves." The intercom crackled faintly, barely audible, carrying the fear of the cabin. Mothers clutched children, strangers held hands, everyone listening, hopping, praying. Emily could feel their collective fear and desperation through the vibration of the cabin floor. Suddenly, a violent shudder coursed through the plane. Lightning split the sky ahead, illuminating jagged mountain peaks emerging through clouds. Emily's stomach dropped. Turbulence had intensified. One wing dipped sharply, nearly catching a wingtip on the jagged terrain below. She fought the yoke, pushing every ounce of strength into stabilizing the craft. Instruments flickered, warnings blared. Hughes groaned, wiping sweat from his brow. "We won't clear it," he whispered. Emily's teeth clenched. "We will." She adjusted the flaps manually, feeling the uneven hydraulics resist, the plane yawing slightly, then stabilizing. The lake was still visible, a dark mirror of calm water amidst chaos. She had seconds, maybe less, to reach it. The captain spoke, voice barely audible. I've never seen anyone handle this." Emily didn't respond. There was no time. She scanned the terrain, recalculated descent, adjusted her approach. Every second felt like an eternity, every heartbeat a countdown. And then, just as the plane leveled, a new danger revealed itself. The fuel warning had become critical. Smoke began curling from the rear of the fuselage. Sparks flickered along the panel edges. A fire could erupt any second. Emily's hands tightened on the yoke, knuckles white, arms burning with effort. She glanced at the altimeter. 340,032,000. The mountains were rising faster than she could descend. She had one choice: glide toward the lake or risk catastrophic collision with terrain. "Hold on," she whispered, not to herself, to everyone, to the plane, to fate itself. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the wing tips slicing through clouds. Emily adjusted the ailerons, banking carefully, calculating lift, drag, and glide slope simultaneously. Every calculation mattered. Every motion mattered. One wrong input, one hesitation, and all 178 lives on board could vanish. Rodriguez's hand trembled as he pointed to the lake. You can reach it," he said. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll reach it, just trust me, stay with me." The plane shuddered violently, wings groaning. Sparks flickered in the cabin. Warning lights flashed relentlessly. And then, just as her muscles burned, her mind raced, and her pulse pounded like a drum, the plane leveled. For a fleeting second, everything was silent. The storm still raged around them, turbulence still threatened, but Emily felt a faint, tenuous control returning. The lake was ahead, dark and still, like a mirror reflecting the sky. But the plane was losing altitude fast. Emily exhaled sharply. There would be no time for hesitation. The next minutes would decide everything. The cockpit smelled of ozone and fear. The low hum of dying electronics pulsed like a heartbeat slowing to a stop. Emily Carter's hands clenched the yoke, knuckles white, arms shaking with fatigue and tension. Every vibration, every subtle movement of the aircraft screamed danger. Outside, the storm churned with an almost sentient fury, clouds swirling violently, lightning streaking across jagged peaks below. Rain hammered the windshield with relentless ferocity. The plane, a massive fuselage built for controlled flight, was now a wild beast fighting its own weight, and Emily was the only thing standing between it and disaster. Rodriguez slumped against the side, blood streaked along his sleeve. His usual authority was gone, replaced by raw, helpless fear. Hughes was barely conscious, eyes half-lidded, mouth moving in a whisper that only Emily could catch. I can't hold it. She's alone now." Emily didn't flinch. She couldn't. There was no time for doubt. There were no simulations for this moment, no textbook for dual-engine failure at cruising altitude with hundreds of lives depending on her decisions. She had to improvise, adapt, survive. Every principle she had learned, every emergency drill she had memorized converged in her mind. She was the pilot now. She was the captain. The first thing she did was stabilize the plane. The nose pitched downward slightly with the loss of thrust, and the wings tilted dangerously with each gust of turbulence. Emily fought the controls, forcing the yoke to respond despite failing hydraulics. Each motion was measured, precise, the culmination of instinct and training. The artificial horizon flickered and swayed, and the altimeter spun downward with merciless speed. Passengers screamed somewhere beyond the reinforced cockpit door. Emily could hear the subtle groans of the fuselage, the rattling of luggage, the soft sobs and prayers. She whispered to herself, not for calm but to focus. Stay calm. Control what you can. The plane had leveled momentarily, allowing Emily to assess the situation. Both engines were dead. Hydraulics were failing. Fuel was leaking, and the storm ahead threatened to push them off course entirely. Her options were shrinking by the second. She ran calculations in her head: glide ratio, distance to the nearest potential landing site, wind and descent rate. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged and unforgiving, a dangerous obstacle. And the Lake Rodriguez had pointed to, 10 miles northwest, was all that could save them. Emily adjusted the flaps manually, feeling the resistance of failing hydraulics. The yoke was heavy, sluggish, as if the aircraft itself were resisting her commands. She applied subtle pressure, feeling the wings respond, just enough to guide them toward the distant lake shimmering below like a sliver of hope. She could see nothing but clouds and rain ahead, yet instinct and training pushed her forward. Every second counted. Hughes groaned, barely conscious, but Emily pressed the oxygen mask over his face to ensure he remained alive. "We need your eyes, Hughes. Stay with me," she said firmly. There was no time for hesitation, for panic, for fear. She had to act. A sudden lurch rocked the plane. Lightning illuminated jagged mountain peaks ahead, revealing the razor-edge terrain that threatened to slice the aircraft apart. Emily's stomach dropped. The descent was too rapid, the storm too intense. But there was no alternative. She had to fly, navigate, glide, and survive, all simultaneously. "Passengers," Emily called over the intercom, her voice firm, commanding attention. "This is your pilot speaking. Remain calm. Follow instructions. Brace for impact if necessary. We will get through this together." Somewhere in the cabin, a child cried, a mother whispered prayers, and others clutched whatever was within reach. Emily could feel their fear vibrating through the floor beneath her. She drew in a deep breath and refocused on the yoke. The plane tilted violently. One wing dipped dangerously close to the jagged peaks revealed in the lightning flashes. Emily pushed against the yoke with all her strength, muscles burning, eyes straining to keep the wings level. Instruments flickered. Alarms blared. Smoke began curling from the rear fuselage. Fuel was leaking, and every moment brought the threat of fire closer. Emily forced herself to ignore the panic clawing at her chest. She ran through procedures in real time, combining logic, calculation, and pure intuition. "We're going to make it," she whispered, as much to herself as to everyone depending on her. She adjusted the glide path, keeping the nose level while banking carefully to avoid obstacles, her mind calculating every variable: wind, altitude, angle, distance, drag. Rodriguez's voice was barely audible, trembling. I've never seen anyone handle this." Emily didn't answer. There was no time. Every second the lake ahead was shrinking as mountains threatened to intercept them. She could feel the plane's wings flexing under the stress, the fuselage groaning with every turbulence gust. Yet, for the first time, she felt a fleeting connection with the machine, a mutual understanding. She guided it, and it responded, slightly, slowly, but enough. The storm intensified. Rain hammered the cockpit and lightning flashed dangerously close. Emily banked hard, skimming just above the mountain ridges, her pulse synchronized with the violent rhythm of the storm. Flaps adjusted manually, landing gear still retracted for stability. Every input mattered, every motion could be life or death. Hughes stirred, mumbling incoherently. Emily pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Stay with me. We're almost there," she said. The first officer's eyes flickered, a spark of consciousness returning, but Emily couldn't afford to rely on him fully. She was alone now in terms of command. The lake emerged briefly through a gap in the clouds, a dark mirror below glistening in the storm's intermittent light. Emily's eyes locked on it. Relief and fear surged simultaneously. She could make it, but only if she maintained perfect control. The descent rate had to be precise. The glide had to be flawless. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and the mountains would claim them. The plane shuddered violently. Sparks flickered along the edge of the fuselage. Fuel fumes filled the cockpit. Emily's lungs burned as she fought to stabilize the aircraft. She pressed her lips together, suppressing fear, panic, and exhaustion. There was no room for anything but control. Emily whispered to herself, focusing on the rhythm of flight, the feel of the yoke, the subtle vibrations of the plane. "Stay calm, focus. One movement at a time. You can do this." Then a new alarm blared. The hydraulic system was failing completely. The yoke now resisted violently, flopping with her every input. Emily adjusted using every ounce of strength, relying on intuition honed from years of emergency drills. The lake was still ahead, shimmering like salvation, but the storm was relentless. Rain blinded the windshield. Lightning illuminated the jagged peaks in split-second flashes. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing the plane forward. She had reached the critical point. The glide had to succeed, the descent had to be controlled, and there was no margin for error. She had taken full command, and the lives of 178 passengers, plus 2 incapacitated pilots, rested entirely on her shoulders. And for the first time in the heart of the storm, with the plane lurching violently, alarms screaming, and fuel fumes creeping into the cockpit, Emily felt the enormity of her responsibility. The moment of truth had arrived. There would be no rehearsal. There would be no safety net. This was real. This was now. And the lake was all that stood between survival and catastrophe. The storm had fully claimed the sky. Lightning lanced across the dark clouds, illuminating the violent peaks of the mountains below, each jagged edge a potential grave. Rain hammered the windshield, blurring vision and assaulting Emily Carter's senses. The plane, a massive machine built for comfort and control, now felt like a fragile paper glider tossed in the wind. Her muscles ached, her hands were raw on the yoke, yet her mind burned with clarity. She had a goal, the lake. That glimmering sliver of water ahead represented life itself. Everything else was death. Hughes slumped further into his seat, barely conscious. Rodriguez's injury had worsened. A deep gash on his arm bled through his uniform. Emily cast a glance over her shoulder, seeing panic etched into the flight attendants' faces as they clutched the rails, shouting reassurances to passengers who screamed in terror. The plane tilted violently, and her stomach lurched. "Brace for turbulence," she called over the intercom. Her voice was calm, commanding, but inside, fear churned like molten lava. There was no hiding the storm's fury. Every gust felt like a physical blow, every vibration a warning that the airframe was nearing its limits. Emily's eyes returned to the lake. It was still visible, though partially obscured by clouds and rain, like a hidden oasis. She recalculated in seconds: glide angle, descent rate, wind velocity, and potential obstacles. Even with perfect calculations, the approach would be impossible without complete control. But she had no choice. She would have to fly the plane as if it were an extension of her own body, one with her instincts, her focus, her will. She adjusted the flaps manually, feeling the yoke resist with every micro-adjustment. Hydraulic failures made even basic maneuvers exhausting. The plane lurched, a violent side-to-side motion throwing her weight against the seatbelt. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing herself to steady each movement. Her mind blocked out the chaos, the screaming passengers, the flashing warnings, the lightning, the rain. Only the yoke, the wings, the distant lake mattered. Hughes groaned, partially roused. "We won't make it," he muttered, voice slurred, barely audible over the storm. Emily reached over, pressing the oxygen mask over his face again. "You're going to help me, just keep your eyes open. We can do this," she said firmly. He blinked, consciousness flickering like a candle. Lightning illuminated the approaching mountains. Emily banked hard, skimming over jagged ridges by mere feet. Rain lashed at the windshield, visibility dropping to near zero. Flaps and ailerons responded sluggishly. The yoke felt like lifting concrete. Sparks flickered from the panel edges. Smoke curled faintly from the rear fuselage, a grim reminder of the leaking fuel. Every second was a battle between survival and catastrophe. Through the cockpit windows, the lake appeared again, an elongated dark ribbon in the midst of the storm. It was closer now, but narrower, surrounded by rocky shores and treacherous slopes. Emily had to glide perfectly. One miscalculation, one tilt, one gust, and they would crash into jagged rock instead of landing on the water. The plane trembled violently. Emily pressed forward, guiding it toward the lake with precision born of instinct and experience. The storm intensified. Rain and wind battered the fuselage, lightning flashing dangerously close, illuminating wings flexing under stress. The passengers screamed, some gripping seats, others praying aloud. Emily's voice rose above the panic, steady and commanding. "Stay calm, follow instructions. We will survive this." Rodriguez tried to speak but coughed violently. His arm was weak, blood dripping onto the console. Emily adjusted the yoke with more force, compensating for failing hydraulics, and maneuvered the plane through a narrow gap between a ridge and a cliff. Sparks flew from the panels, warning alarms blared incessantly. Her heart pounded. She knew the margin for error was zero. The lake stretched below, seemingly within reach. Yet the approach was treacherous. Strong winds pushed the plane toward rocky shores, turbulence threatened to flip it, and fuel fumes filled the cockpit, a reminder of how little time remained. Emily recalculated, adjusted her angle, and eased the plane into a controlled descent. Every muscle burned, every nerve fired. The aircraft creaked in protest, but it responded, just enough. From behind, flight attendants shouted directions to passengers who scrambled to brace positions. The tension in the cabin was palpable, a living entity vibrating through the fuselage. Emily felt it too, the weight of responsibility, the fear, the stakes. She swallowed it, letting determination take over. The plane's descent rate increased, altitude dropping rapidly. Emily's eyes locked on the lake, the only viable landing zone. The mountains loomed on either side, a reminder of how little room for error remained. She guided the nose downward, banking carefully, trying to align the fuselage with the water. Sparks from electrical systems flared again. Smoke thickened, curling ominously. Every warning panel was lit, yet Emily refused to let panic enter her mind. A sudden lurch rocked the plane as turbulence hit a peak. The wing dipped dangerously. Emily fought against the controls with all her strength. Sweat ran down her face, mingling with rain dripping through a small cockpit seal leak. Her muscles burned from exertion. Her heart pounded. Yet, despite every obstacle, she kept the plane on course, guiding it toward salvation. Rodriguez whispered, almost in disbelief, You might actually do it." Emily didn't answer. Focus consumed her entirely. She was guiding the plane through impossible odds toward the narrow lake below. Every second was critical. Every adjustment mattered. A gust of wind threatened to tilt the plane into the rocky shore, but Emily countered instantly, muscles straining, eyes blazing with concentration. The lake grew closer. She could see the dark water below, stretching like a lifeline. The landing had to be flawless, precise, controlled. She adjusted flaps for maximum lift without stalling, kept the nose level, and reduced speed carefully. The plane's descent rate finally began to stabilize. Then a new threat emerged, trees along the lakeshore. Emily's stomach dropped. There was no time to divert, she had to glide over them perfectly. The fuselage quivered violently as branches scraped the wings. Sparks flew, panels screamed, yet the plane held together. Emily forced the yoke down slightly, the nose dipping, water now directly below, the final meters counting down. Passengers screamed, a collective cry of terror and hope. Emily's pulse roared in her ears, synchronized with every vibration of the plane. This was it, the moment where preparation met destiny. The lake stretched wider below, the surrounding mountains threatening from either side. Emily forced the controls, manually guiding the aircraft toward a controlled water landing. And in that instant, everything depended on her skill, her courage, and the thin thread of hope that held together 178 lives. The lake was closer now, its dark, rippling surface a fragile lifeline amid the chaos of storm and mountains. Emily Carter's hands were raw on the yoke, sweat and rain dripping into her eyes. Her arms burned, every muscle straining against the increasingly sluggish controls. Hydraulic failures made every adjustment a fight, yet she refused to yield. The plane was heavy, uncooperative, but she could feel its subtle responses to her corrections. Precision had become her only weapon. One wrong move and the mountains, or the water, would claim them. Hughes groaned behind her, partially conscious. His eyes fluttered open, panic still visible. "We won't clear it," he whispered. Emily pressed the oxygen mask to his face, keeping him alive. "Stay with me, focus. You'll help me." Rodriguez was slumped to the side, clutching his wound. Blood streaked the cockpit, but he nodded faintly. He had no choice but to trust her. Emily didn't have time to consider fear, fatigue, or the scale of the disaster. All that mattered was controlling the plane, guiding it to the lake. Rain battered the fuselage like hail. Lightning illuminated the jagged peaks surrounding the narrow stretch of water, making them appear even closer than they were. Emily adjusted the yoke slightly, banking hard to avoid a cliff on the right. Sparks flickered from the panels. Warning lights blared incessantly. She felt the aircraft quiver, each shudder a warning of structural limits. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Glide calculations ran in her mind: descent rate, wind speed, water angle, flap settings. The lake was their only chance. The mountains offered none. The trees along the shore scraped the wings, sparks flew as metal grazed branches. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing the plane level. The nose angled precisely. Every second mattered. The storm was relentless. Rain reduced visibility to mere feet. Wind gusts threatened to roll the aircraft, and the fuselage flexed under pressure. Emily's arms burned, her hands raw on the yoke. Sweat and rain stung her eyes. She blinked through the blur, scanning the lake below. She could see a narrow opening, a straight stretch of water flanked by trees and rocks. Precision would save them, hesitation would kill them all. Passengers screamed, clinging to seats, bracing themselves. Emily's voice cut through the chaos over the intercom, firm, commanding, unwavering. "Stay calm, follow instructions. We are landing, but we will survive. Trust me." The plane lurched violently as a gust caught the wing. Emily fought against it, muscles screaming, yoke resisting, flaps straining under hydraulic failure. She pressed every ounce of strength into maintaining a stable glide path. Sparks flew from the console. Smoke curled faintly from electrical panels. Fuel fumes filled the cabin. Time was a merciless countdown. She leveled the plane over the lake, gauging distance, altitude, speed. The nose dipped slightly as she prepared for impact, trying to maintain the gentlest descent possible. Trees along the shore loomed, but she had to ignore them. Only the water mattered. A misalignment of inches could flip the aircraft, shred the fuselage, end everything. Hughes groaned again, mumbling incoherently. Emily pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Stay with me. We're almost there," she said. He blinked, consciousness flickering. Rodriguez gritted his teeth, adjusting weakly, trying to assist. Emily acknowledged them both with a nod. Every ounce of strength mattered. The fuselage quivered as she reduced speed, bringing flaps to half deployed, adjusting for lift and stability. Water rippled below, a narrow runway shimmering amid darkness. Rain struck the fuselage like steel. Lightning illuminated the shoreline, revealing jagged rocks and trees that would tear the wings apart on contact. The plane dipped dangerously, but Emily fought every motion with precision. Passengers braced. A child whimpered, a mother whispered prayers. Emily ignored everything except the yoke, the plane, and the water below. The descent rate increased. 500 feet, 400, 300, 200. Emily held her breath, every calculation converging on a single goal: land alive. The wing tips brushed the treetops, scraping, bending, sparks flying. Emily's pulse thundered. She tilted slightly to clear them, then leveled, adjusting constantly. The lake stretched ahead, narrow but sufficient. She guided the plane with painstaking care, lowering the nose gradually. The fuselage trembled with every micro-adjustment, but the aircraft held together. Time slowed. Emily could hear the rain pounding, the fuselage groaning, the frantic heartbeat of her own body. She adjusted the throttles, though dead, they affected what little remaining controls existed, then focused entirely on the descent. The water grew closer. Trees whipped past the windows. Sparks flared from scrapes. Smoke thickened. Fuel fumes burned in her nostrils. "Brace," she yelled over the intercom. Passengers followed instinctively. Flight attendants held them down, guiding them as the plane descended. Emily's eyes were locked on the water. One final adjustment, a subtle push on the yoke, leveled the fuselage. The nose dipped further, speed reduced, wings flexed, the aircraft aligned perfectly. Then came contact. The fuselage kissed the water, bow rising slightly as it skimmed the surface. Passengers screamed, some in fear, some in relief. Water sprayed across windows. The plane bounced, skidding across the lake's surface. Emily fought to maintain direction, adjusting with every second. Sparks flew from the wingtips, grazing trees. The landing was chaotic, violent, but controlled. The aircraft finally slowed, sliding to a stop on the dark water. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then passengers erupted in crying, hugging, shouting, gasping for breath. Emily's arms trembled as she released the yoke. She exhaled sharply, realizing they had survived. Hughes slumped forward, exhausted but alive. Rodriguez, bloodied and bruised, gave Emily a weak nod, eyes glistening with gratitude. Flight attendants helped passengers release seatbelts, guiding them to prepare for evacuation. The plane was afloat but precariously. Fuel fumes and sparks meant minutes counted for evacuation. Emily motioned to the crew, "Get everyone out, now." The passengers, still trembling, obeyed. Mothers clutched children. Strangers helped one another. Emily and the crew guided the last passengers through emergency exits. Water lapped at the fuselage, waves forming from the plane's impact. Every second was critical. Sparks flared near leaking fuel lines. Finally, the last passenger exited. Emily glanced back. The cockpit was smoke-filled, panels sparking. Rodriguez struggled out beside her. Hughes followed, coughing violently. Emily pushed herself out into the rain onto the wet fuselage. Behind them, the plane groaned, sparks flying as fuel ignited. A roar of fire erupted along the fuselage, chasing them off the wreckage. They tumbled into the water just as the plane erupted, flames shooting into the stormy sky. Cold water shocked their bodies, but survival surged in every fiber of Emily's being. She helped the crew and passengers float toward the shore, pulling those weaker than herself through the turbulent water. The lake, their salvation, now served as both refuge and witness to the disaster barely avoided. Emily's lungs burned as she surfaced again, catching sight of the remaining passengers all alive. Her adrenaline roared, but so did exhaustion, fear, and the weight of what they had just survived. She looked back at the wreckage, the twisted fuselage, flames reaching skyward, smoke curling into the storm. And only then did reality begin to sink in. The water was icy, pulling at Emily Carter's body with every wave, threatening to drain her strength. The lake, once a salvation, now tossed survivors and wreckage like driftwood. Sparks from the damaged fuselage ignited fuel leaking into the water, sending small flames skittering across the surface. The roaring storm above seemed almost indifferent to the human drama below, as wind and rain battered bodies and debris alike. Every second was a test of endurance, instinct, and courage. Emily's arms ached from pulling herself across the slick fuselage, dragging passengers who were injured, panicked, or too weak to swim. A father struggled to keep hold of his child, shivering violently. She grabbed them both, hauling them toward a partially submerged wing that provided relative stability. Water lapped over the fuselage, the plane shifting slightly with each wave. Sparks danced around the wings, hissing as they touched the thin film of fuel floating atop the water. A flight attendant appeared next to her, soaked to the bone, panic etched on her face. "Some of the passengers can't swim," she shouted over the roar of the storm. "We need help." Emily nodded, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. She scanned the water. A floating section of fuselage extended toward the shore. "Grab my hand," she yelled, reaching for a young man clutching a life vest. His teeth chattered, eyes wide with terror, but Emily's grip was firm, guiding him toward relative safety. Behind her, a fireball erupted from the rear fuselage where fuel had pooled. Heat washed over them. Emily didn't flinch. She yanked herself and the nearest passengers through the icy water, using the wingtips and floating debris as makeshift guides. The plane was a death trap. Every moment delayed increased the risk of explosion. Rodriguez struggled beside her, blood streaking his uniform, fatigue and pain evident. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a safer section. Hughes coughed violently, smoke stinging his eyes, but Emily pressed him forward. Each movement was calculated, each decision life-saving. A mother screamed, panic-stricken, clutching her infant. Emily extended herself, reaching through the freezing water. Her hand closed on the mother's wrist. She hauled her across floating debris, each wave threatening to separate them, each spark threatening ignition. Sweat and rain mingled with tears and blood. Fear was everywhere, but so was determination. The first wave of survivors reached the shallows. Emily didn't pause. She dove back into the water, pulling more passengers toward safety. Each time she surfaced, she scanned the wreckage. Sparks leapt from the fuselage as fuel ignited in brief flare-ups, smoke rising in dark plumes. The plane groaned ominously, the structure cracking as water and fire competed for dominance. Emily's voice rang out over the chaos. "Keep moving. Everyone hold together. You will make it." Her tone was commanding, unwavering, even as fatigue clawed at her muscles and hypothermia threatened to set in. She ignored shivering, pain, and fear. She had one priority: every life she could save. A small explosion erupted near the tail section, sending debris and water spraying across the survivors. A young boy lost his grip, flailing in the icy water. Emily dove instinctively, reaching him before panic could claim him. She pulled him to the floating fuselage section, pressing him close, whispering instructions to keep calm. The storm raged above them. Lightning reflected off the churning water, illuminating terrified, exhausted faces. Every passenger Emily helped was a victory, but the plane's condition worsened with every passing second. Flames leapt higher, smoke thickened, and the risk of a catastrophic explosion increased exponentially. Time blurred. Emily moved like a force of nature, pulling, guiding, instructing. Flight attendants aided where they could, stabilizing weaker passengers, helping them cling to floating debris, signaling to those too far to reach. The shoreline was near, but not near enough to relax. Waves battered them. Winds ripped through the lake, tossing bodies against debris. Sparks hissed as the fuselage burned in patches. Emily grabbed an elderly woman, hoisting her across the debris toward the shore. Her arms trembled, but she didn't falter. A father shouted for his child, lost amid the chaos. Emily spun, scanning the water. There, a small girl clung to a life vest, shaking violently. Emily dove, sweeping through the water with a strength born of desperation, reaching her just as another wave threatened to sweep her away. The shoreline was close now, feet of mud and rock reachable. Emily, Rodriguez, and Hughes helped push passengers toward it. Bodies collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping, shivering, clutching one another. Relief mixed with shock. Emily took a moment to glance back at the lake. The plane was a pyre. Fire erupted along the fuselage, flames shooting high into the stormy sky, smoke spiraling with the wind. Every second delayed could have been the end. and yet, miraculously, they had survived. Emily's body shuddered from exhaustion, hypothermia, and adrenaline crashing simultaneously. She sat on the muddy shore, coughing, shivering, water dripping from her hair. Around her, passengers clung to each other, sobbing, crying, laughing through tears. Children cried into parents' chests. Flight attendants wept openly. Rodriguez reached Emily's side, bloodied and battered, voice trembling. You saved them, all of them." Emily shook her head, numb with disbelief. No time. Everyone needs to move, away from the wreck. Fire spreads fast, keep going." Survivors staggered from the shore, some helping others, all escaping the immediate danger of the burning plane. Sparks leapt into the air, small explosions ricocheting off debris. Emily helped Hughes stand, then guided him along with Rodriguez. Hypothermia was setting in, but they pressed forward toward safety, away from the inferno. The plane's last groan echoed across the lake. Metal buckled, fuselage cracking further. Sparks and flames danced, threatening the water's surface. Emily's heart pounded as she realized how close they had come to death. Every life saved felt miraculous. Finally, the survivors regrouped on solid ground. Emily collapsed to her knees, shivering violently, watching the inferno consume the aircraft that had nearly killed them all. Firefighters arrived in the distance, silhouetted against lightning and rain, sirens screaming. They ran toward the group, pulling survivors to safety, covering them with blankets. Emily sat amidst the chaos, breathing hard, adrenaline fatting into exhaustion, relief, and shock. Every muscle ached. Her hands were raw, her clothes soaked, but she was alive. They were all alive. Rodriguez placed a hand on her shoulder, voice barely audible over the storm. You saved 178 lives today. You are extraordinary." Emily looked around at the survivors, parents hugging children, strangers clinging together, faces wet with tears, mud, and rain. The scale of what had just happened hit her. She had flown a dead plane, navigated a storm, avoided mountains, landed on water, and guided hundreds to safety. She had done what seemed impossible. And yet, despite relief, one thought lingered, silent, heavy. If she hadn't acted, if hesitation had won, none of them would have survived. Her hands trembled as she finally let them fall to her sides. She had controlled the impossible, held life itself in her hands. And for now, everyone lived to tell the story. The storm began to wane, though thunder rumbled overhead like a distant drumbeat of chaos. The rain, while lighter, still soaked every survivor, every rescuer, every inch of the lakeshore. Emily Carter sat on the muddy bank, exhausted, shivering, every muscle screaming for rest, yet alert to the ongoing danger. Sparks still flickered across the twisted fuselage, and smoke spiraled from the burning wreckage, reminding her that the threat wasn't over. Emergency crews arrived, sirens slicing through the damp air. Firefighters sprinted toward the lake, dragging hoses and flotation devices, shouting instructions to both survivors and crew. Paramedics dashed through the mud, pulling blankets over trembling passengers, checking vital signs, administering oxygen. Every movement was urgent. Every second counted. The adrenaline that had carried Emily through the flight now mingled with fatigue, fear, and relief. "Are all passengers accounted for?" Emily called to the nearest flight attendant, voice hoarse but sharp. The attendant, drenched and trembling, checked the manifest. Everyone is here. Everyone made it." Her words barely registered before tears streamed down her face. The weight of survival, the horror of near death, hit suddenly and fully. Emily's gaze swept across the shoreline. Families clung together, children pressed to mothers' chests, strangers supporting each other, some still shivering violently from hypothermia. Rodriguez leaned heavily against her shoulder, bandaged arm dripping blood. Hughes sat nearby, coughing, exhausted, eyes unfocused but alive. The first responders began the systematic evacuation of the injured. Emily helped wherever she could, pulling blankets around shivering survivors, assisting medics in moving those unable to walk. She refused to allow herself to collapse completely. Responsibility had not yet ended. Every life still depended on her presence, on her guidance. A firefighter approached, helmet wet, eyes wide. "Ma'am, we need everyone to move further from the wreck. Fuel is still leaking. Any spark could ignite a major explosion." Emily nodded sharply, signaling to the survivors. "Keep moving, stay together, help each other." She scanned the group, ensuring no one was left behind, her heart hammering with the knowledge that danger was still real. A mother clutched her child tightly, crying, thank you for saving us." Emily only nodded, voice breaking slightly. "Stay safe, stay calm." She helped guide them toward a higher, safer bank, away from the water and fire. Every step was a struggle, the mud thick and slick, yet each movement mattered. As survivors moved inland, Emily's mind replayed the flight. The dual-engine failure, the fire, the mountains, the lightning, the lake. The precision required to navigate each obstacle, the split-second decisions, the fear, the panic. It all crystallized in her memory like a vivid nightmare she had survived. And yet, despite the terror, hope had carried them through. Rodriguez, pale and trembling, managed a weak smile. "Emily, I've never seen anyone handle that. You saved all of us." Emily swallowed, eyes scanning the horizon where the twisted fuselage burned, water boiling with sparks. "We did it together," she said quietly. Her voice carried authority even as her body trembled from exhaustion and cold. "Everyone survived because we stayed calm, we stayed focused." The paramedics began triaging injuries. Minor cuts and bruises were treated on site. Hypothermic victims were wrapped in thermal blankets. Emily assisted where she could, but the mental exhaustion was beginning to weigh heavily. The weight of every decision she had made, every second she had held control, every life she had carried, now settled on her shoulders in full force. Hughes approached her, voice hoarse. I thought we were done for." Emily gave him a firm nod, eyes shadowed but steady. "We're not done yet. Make sure everyone gets checked. Help them. Then we can rest." She moved along the shoreline, checking on passengers, ensuring that even the weakest were accounted for. Families huddled together, strangers embraced in tears, and still, Emily remained vigilant. Every flicker of fire, every sound from the wreckage, kept her on edge. Survival had been earned, but danger lingered in sparks, fuel, and storm-swollen waters. The media arrived soon after, helicopters circling above, lights cutting through the dissipating storm clouds. Cameras caught flames and smoke, capturing the wreckage and survivors. Emily ignored them, her focus solely on the people around her. Questions, accolades, headlines, they were meaningless now. Lives mattered. Only lives mattered. A young boy approached, soaked and shivering, clutching a life vest. He stared up at Emily with wide, terrified eyes. She knelt, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. "You're safe now," she said, voice calm but firm. "Stay with your family. Don't let go of anyone you love." The child nodded, tears streaming, and ran back to his parents. Emily exhaled slowly, surveying the scene. Every person she saw alive was proof that control, courage, and resolve could defy even the most impossible odds. Firefighters finally managed to stabilize the fuselage fire, though the plane was beyond saving. Emily and the remaining crew helped coordinate with authorities to ensure the shore was clear. The survivors moved to safe zones, and that emergency medical care reached everyone in need. Rodriguez, still leaning on her shoulder, whispered, "You are a hero, truly. The world will know." Emily shook her head, voice quiet but resolute. This wasn't about heroism. It was about focus, about survival, about staying calm when everything else is chaos. As dawn began to break, the storm fully retreated. The lake reflected the pale morning light, waves lapping gently against the wreckage, the flames extinguished. Emily stood at the edge, water dripping from her hair and clothes, looking at the remnants of the plane that had nearly taken them all. And then, for the first time since the engines failed at 38,000 feet, she allowed herself to breathe. Exhaustion, relief, and disbelief washed over her. She had flown a dead plane. navigated a storm, landed on water, and guided every single passenger to safety. But there was still one thing Emily knew. The aftermath, the investigations, the questions, the media, they were inevitable. And she would face them all with the same precision and resolve she had used to save 178 lives. As survivors were led away, Emily stood silently, eyes on the horizon, body trembling from the cold, heart still racing. The weight of what she had achieved pressed down, yet she felt something else, a quiet, unspoken bond with every person she had saved. She had faced the impossible, and somehow she had emerged victorious. The storm had passed completely, leaving a cold, misty morning over the lake. The wreckage, still smoldering, reflected the rising sun like a scar against the placid water. Emergency crews continued triaging survivors, ensuring everyone had medical attention, blankets, and food. Emily Carter, still soaked and trembling from exhaustion, watched as families reunited, strangers embraced, and relief washed over the lake shore. She felt a hollow ache in her muscles, a deep weariness, but also something she hadn't felt in hours, a quiet, grounding sense of accomplishment. She helped the last of the passengers onto dry ground. Some held her hands, shaking, eyes wide with gratitude. Others, parents of crying children, embraced her tightly, whispering thanks she couldn't answer adequately. She gave what comfort she could, but her mind drifted back to the flight, the impossible descent, the flaming fuselage, the icy water, the roar of the storm. Every decision had mattered. Every split-second action had been the difference between life and death. Rodriguez leaned heavily against a firefighter, bandaged and bruised but alive. He caught her gaze, his expression one of awe and exhaustion. "Emily, you didn't just survive that, you controlled it. You saved them all." Emily shook her head. "It wasn't me alone. The crew, the passengers, we all stayed focused. We all made it through because we kept moving, kept thinking, kept calm." She exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline finally ebbing, replaced by fatigue that threatened to collapse her into the mud. Paramedics guided her to a nearby medical tent for evaluation. Her body trembled violently, soaked to the bone, exhausted beyond measure, but her mind remained alert. They checked vitals, gave her blankets, and offered a hot drink. Emily sipped carefully, eyes scanning the shore, watching families hug, children laugh, the injured receive care. Every life saved, every reunion, every tear and smile. It was the proof of what she had accomplished. News crews began to arrive in waves, helicopters circling overhead, cameras capturing footage of the aftermath, the survivors, and the smoldering wreckage. Emily remained focused on the people, not the cameras, though she could feel the attention turning toward her. Questions would come, accolades would follow, and the world would soon know the story she had lived. But for now, she kept her eyes on the survivors. A journalist approached, microphone in hand, eyes wide. "Are you the pilot who saved 178 lives today?" Emily nodded, voice low but firm. "I'm Emily Carter, but this wasn't about me. It was about staying calm and focused, doing everything possible to keep people alive." The reporter stared at her in disbelief, then nodded slowly, scribbling notes. "You've become an American hero overnight." Emily allowed herself a brief smile but quickly looked away, toward the children clinging to parents, the elderly being assisted by firefighters, the shaken but surviving passengers. Her mind wasn't on fame or accolades. It was on the reality of the disaster they had all endured and survived. Meanwhile, Rodriguez approached, his arm bandaged and still bleeding slightly. He held a small radio in his hand. "Emily, the authorities are asking you to give a statement. They want to know exactly how you handled the descent and water landing. They'll probably want a full debrief." Emily nodded. She had expected it and she would comply. But first, she had to ensure every passenger and crew member was accounted for, medically evaluated, and safely away from the lake. She moved among the survivors, checking on them, offering reassurance where she could, guiding them toward buses and ambulances brought by local authorities. Finally, once everyone was settled, Emily was escorted to a command tent. Officials, investigators and airline representatives awaited. She was asked to recount every decision, every action, every detail of the flight, the engine failure, the storm, and the landing. She spoke calmly, methodically, describing the dual-engine failure, the hydraulics problem, the approach to the lake, and the water landing. She explained her decision-making process, how she prioritized lives over protocol, and how every passenger and crew member's safety guided her actions. The investigators listened, eyes wide, scribbling notes. Airline officials nodded, some visibly shaken by the bravery and precision displayed. Emily's words were clear, measured, yet carried the weight of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. Every sentence carried the gravity of the lives saved. Once the debrief concluded, Emily was escorted outside, where the first responders and surviving passengers had gathered. A hush fell as people recognized her. Mothers held children close, fathers nodded, passengers cheered, some clapping, others crying. Emily, exhausted and soaked, allowed herself to absorb the moment. The reality of her achievement was overwhelming. She had guided a plane through a storm, executed a near-impossible water landing, and saved 178 lives. A firefighter approached, shaking her hand firmly. "You saved all of us today. Not just the passengers, you saved everyone out here too. Incredible." Emily nodded, heart swelling but her voice quiet. "We all did it together." News helicopters captured the reunion on film, zooming in on Emily standing among the survivors. Across social media and live broadcasts, viewers would see her courage, her focus, her relentless drive to protect every life. She had become a symbol of calm in chaos, precision in disaster, and heroism in its purest form. Hours later, once survivors were transported to hospitals, taken to warm facilities, or reunited with family, Emily found herself alone by the edge of the lake. The water, now calm, reflected the early morning light. The wreckage, still smoldering, marked the site of near catastrophe. She knelt, touched the water, and let herself reflect. The storm was over, the danger had passed, and yet the memory would remain forever etched in her mind. She felt exhaustion fully crash over her. Her body, mind, and soul had been pushed to their limits. She had flown a dead plane, battled a storm, navigated impossible terrain, landed on water, and survived an inferno in icy water. Every moment had been a test of courage, precision, and resilience. And as the sun rose fully over the horizon, illuminating the lake, the mountains, and the smoldering wreckage, Emily realized something profound. Heroism wasn't about recognition, accolades, or fame. It was about action in the face of impossible odds, about calm in chaos, and about courage when fear threatened to paralyze. She would be recognized, lauded, and celebrated. Headlines would call her a hero. Yet Emily knew the truth. It wasn't her alone. It was the crew, the passengers, the rescuers, every hand that guided, every life that held together, that had made survival possible. And in that unity, that shared perseverance, lay the real triumph. Emily Carter stood, drenched and exhausted, yet unbroken. She had faced the impossible and survived. Not as a pilot, not as a civilian, but as the living embodiment of courage under fire, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And somewhere in the distance, the mountains, the lake, and the storm-tossed wreckage bore silent witness to the day that a single woman's determination had turned catastrophe into survival, fear into triumph, and disaster into a story that would inspire generations. The plane was gone, the storm had passed, and 178 lives had been saved. Emily Carter, quietly, stood as the hero who had taken command when no one else could, and in doing so, had rewritten the limits of possibility. The world would remember the story, but she would remember the faces, the terrified, the grateful, the alive, and that, more than anything, was enough. The end.